Continue with our Gemara. We're on Sanhedrin, Kuf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, 111a. Now we've talked about the ratio of those being brought into the world to come, those being saved. And we discussed the different interpretations of the verse. One in a city or two in a family as being exclusionary in one reading. And then the Gemara's preferred reading, as we discussed at length, that one person saves the whole city and two people save a whole family. In that context, with respect to the ratio of those being saved, those being delivered, the Gemara brings the next discussion. It's about the middle of the page. The line begins with the word Shemachaya, Atzmai Aleha, and then the fourth word is Tanya. So Tanya we've been taught in Messianic Age text. Rabbi Simoi says, Nema, the verse reads, V'lakachti eschem lila'am. God says to the people who are in Egypt, and I will take you unto me as a nation. This is a verse in Shmois, Perek Vav, Pasuk Zayin, Exodus chapter 6, verse 7. And the verse is saying, God saying, I will take you unto me as a nation, meaning I will bring you to the Mount Sinai and give you the Torah. The Nemar, and the verse reads, Vehevisi eschem, and I will bring you in, referring to the bringing into the land. It's the very next verse, Exodus chapter 6, verse 8. And therefore, Makar Shitziyasan Mitzrayim, we can compare the Exodus from Egypt going to Mount Sinai. In the first verse, V'lakachti eschem lila'am, I will take you unto me as a nation. Compare that, L'biyasan la'eretz, compare that to God bringing them into the land of Israel, which is in the next verse, Ve'vesi eschem, I will bring you. Comparing them in what sense? Ma biyasan la'mitzrayim shnayim misamach riboy. Just like entering the land of Israel, only 2 out of the 600,000 that were there made it into Israel, meaning to say, the generation of the desert died in the desert. The 600,000, which were counted between the ages of 20 and 60, of them, only 2 people survived to make it to the land of Israel. Joshua and Caleb, Yeshua and Kalev, the 2 spies who came back and gave a positive report of the land of Israel. So just like going into the land of Israel was only 2 of the original 600,000, Af Yitziyasim and Mitzrayim, likewise, the Exodus from Egypt, the ratio was only that 2 out of 600,000 left Egypt. So for every 2 people that left Egypt, there were 600,000 who didn't make it out of Egypt. It's quite a small margin, small number. Okay. And this is a statement from Rabbi Simoi. Now we have Rava. Rava is speaking many generations later. The earlier text was from the Messianic age, and now it's Rava in the Gemara age, the Anamoida. Rava says, the same thing is true of the times of Mashiach, that the same ratio will be for every 2 people who will make it to the times in the era of Mashiach. 600,000 will not make it. It's quite a grim number. Shenemar, as the verse reads, V'ansa shama, and she shall answer there, Kimei Nura, as she was in her days of her youth, Ukayayma loisem eretz, like the day she came out of Egypt. And just like when she came out of Egypt, the ratio was 2 to 600,000. So likewise, with the coming of Mashiach, it's only 2 to 600,000. So this is the Gemara statement. Now, I'm going to take the liberty a little bit here, in keeping in line with the previous Gemara about Rabbi Yochanan telling Reish Lakish and I think it was Rav telling Rav Papa that it's not appropriate to their master, to God, to give such a grim report on his people. And therefore, I'm going to share with you another view with respect to how things are going to go down when Mashiach comes. Now, the verse reads in Nitzavim, or Parshas Nitzavim, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, in Devarim, Perek Lamed Pasuk Gimel, chapter 30, verse 3 in the book of Deuteronomy. And there it's referring to the Messianic Era. It says, V'shav Hashem Elokecha eshvuscha, and God, your Lord, will return your returning, or with your returning. So Rashi addresses the unique wording, and that it should have said, God will bring you back, but rather it says, God will return with your returning. That's the implication. So it's a very, very beautiful Rashi. First, Rashi describes how the divine presence itself is in exile. And then as the Jew leaves exile, so does divine presence. Galul Edom, Shchine Ma'im, when the Jews are exiled into Edom, God goes with them. And in their returning, and in the Jews' redemption, there's the divine redemption, the redemption of the divinity, the godliness that is stranded, as it were, that's in exile too, which in of itself is an extremely powerful lesson. Or what we had in the parsha of last week, the one who dwells with you in your impurity, which parenthetically is the way we can think about sin and help us prevent us from sin, is to understand that as we behave in an exile type fashion, when we behave with sin, we're dragging God there with us. If God's with us in exile, then when we behave in an exile type fashion in sin, we drag godliness there too. Thinking about sin that way is puts a whole other weight on what sin really means. Not just personal blemish, but dragging godliness in there too. Which likewise tells you the power of Teshuvah. When a person returns to the proper way, which is like an Exodus type thing, he's leaving that exile behavior. He brings and elevates the godliness that he dragged down there too. So you're redeeming the godliness too. It's an amazing and a very powerful thing, which Kabbalah talks about and Chassidus talks about at length. So that's the first half of Rashi there, where the verse says that God will return with the returning of the Jew. But then there's the second half of the Rashi. And there Rashi says like this, I might add, great is the day when God will ingather the exiled, and it's with such a difficulty, as it were. It says, if God Himself, it says, if God Himself needs to hold you by the hand, each and every Jew from his place. As the verse reads in Yeshaya, Perek Chelek, in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 12. And then you shall collect one by one each Jew. So from this Rashi studying that verse in Isaiah, the simple reading of that Rashi, the clear reading of that Rashi, is that it's not some small percentage of Jews, but rather all Jews. So I'm going to take the liberty again, based on the previous Gemara, about the importance of interpreting verses and in such a way that it allows for more Jews to be redeemed and more Jews to get reward. So I'm submitting to you this other reading, this Rashi reading from Shmois, that every Jew gets out of exile. And Chassidus, especially the Rebbe, would quote this Rashi very often to tell us how actually the difference, where even though the Gemara here compares Egypt, the exodus from Egypt to the redemption, the future redemption, the Messianic Era, nonetheless Chassidus would highlight their difference based on that Rashi I just quoted for you, that when they left Egypt, there's only a certain amount of Jews left. But now at this coming redemption, all Jews will be redeemed. And we hope and pray that this is indeed how it's all going to go down. And the question becomes, what about this pasuk? The pasuk, that the verse that the Gemara quotes, Rabbi quotes to prove his point that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be the same ratio as the Exodus. Va'ansa shama. What's the verse? That they will be responding there, and the Jews will come out the same way they did when they left Egypt. Well, it seems to compare the way they came out of Egypt. It seems to compare the Exodus from Egypt to the future redemption, which would mean it's a small ratio. Now, for that, there's a Rashi here on this Gemara. On this Gemara, the Rashi comments on that verse, and it would seem like Rashi's comment on the verse is out of place. The reason why I'm saying it would seem like it's out of place is because the simple reading of the Gemara is self-understood. Rav is quoting this verse to prove his point, that the Exodus from Egypt is the same thing as the Exodus as the future redemption, and that the ratio is small. But Rashi comments and says, no, the comparison is something else. And the question becomes, why would Rashi have to do that? Just leave it alone. Why don't you have to comment? But based on what I just told you, that there's a Rashi elsewhere where Rashi says that every Jew is going to come out of exile. So therefore Rashi has to comment here to explain how this verse will fit based on his other interpretation that every single Jew will come out of Egypt. And what does he say? He says, they will shall be poor and despondent like they were when they left Egypt. In other words, Rashi is giving us an opening to interpret the verse in comparing the Exodus from Egypt to the day we left Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt comparing to the future redemption, not just to mean the ratio, but to mean something else, in that we're going to be despondent and poor as we were when we left Egypt. That could be physically poor or spiritually poor, in that we are humbled. We don't walk out with arrogance. Okay. But again, as far as the simple reading of the Gemara here is, Rabbi is suggesting that the ratio of those who leave the current exile into the Messianic Era is the same ratio, the same small ratio as it was when the Jews left Egypt. And we saw the other interpretation of Rashi, which says, no, it's going to be different. That when Mashiach comes, all Jews are going to leave, and all Jews are going to come to the exile, as opposed to the way it was when the Jews left Egypt. Now, in terms of talking about the Exodus from Egypt, the Gemara brings up the next discussion. This is a very fascinating discussion. Tanya, we've been taught in the Mishnaic age text. Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Lezer son of Rabbi Yossi says, Pamachas nechnasni Alexandria shemitzrayim. I once went to Alexandria in Egypt. Matzasi zaken echad. I found an elder Egyptian fellow. And this elder Egyptian fellow told me, come, let me show you what my ancestors did to your ancestors, meaning what the Egyptians did to the Jews while they were in exile there. Mehem, some of those Jews, Tavu bayam, they drowned them in the ocean, in the water. Mehem, other Jews, Hargu b'cherev, they murdered by the sword. Mehem, others, miyaku bebinyan, they built them into the building. They took children and Jews and built them into the walls of the buildings that the Jews themselves were building. Terrible torture and death. So this is what the elder fellow tells Rabbi Lezer ben Rabbi Yossi on a trip to Alexandria. Now the Gemara comments, with respect to this issue, the torture of the Egyptians inflicted on the Jews, Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. What does this mean? The verse reads, this is in Shmois, Perek Chelek, Pasuk Chav Gimel, Exodus chapter 5, verse 23, where after God tells Moshe at the burning bush to go speak to Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go. And Moshe Rabbeinu does. And instead of Pharaoh letting the Jews go, Pharaoh doubles down and makes it harder for the Jews. And it seems that the Gemara is reading that incident to mean that when Pharaoh made it harder for the Jews, it was that he inflicted the pain described by this elder, drowning them in the water, some being killed by the sword, and others being built into the buildings themselves, alive. Terrible, terrible persecution and torture. But the verse there reads, Moshe Rabbeinu tells God, and from the time that I went to Paro, to speak in your name, God, you made it worse for these people. End of the verse. Now the Gemara comments on the subsequent conversation between God and Moshe with respect to that verse and the verses that follow. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu. God tells Moses, woe unto those whom we lost, and we will not forget them. Who are these people that God's bemoaning their loss? How many times did I reveal myself to your forefathers? Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Bekel Shaddai. And the only name I revealed to them was the name of Kel Shaddai, which is a term used to describe God as the Lord of the world. God of the world, the one who controls the world, as opposed to other names of God like Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the Shem Hashem, which implies God's transcendence, which is going to be revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu and to the Jewish people at Sinai. But our forefathers weren't exposed to this true name of God, as Rashi comments there in the Torah, the true name of God and God's transcendence and God's truth to fulfill out His promise. So all they saw from me was this name, Kel Shaddai. And they didn't question my judgments. And they didn't ask me, what's your name? Asking me to reveal to them some loftier levels. And yet here you are, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you are complaining. And therefore, woe unto the lost ones. Woe the fact that I lost such wonderful servants, such wonderful people, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who served me so faithfully. And the Gemara goes on to say what God's telling Moshe of how he revealed himself to each of the three forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and how each of them could have challenged me, and yet they didn't challenge me. And here you are, Moshe Rabbeinu, challenging me. Amarti, says God, I told Lavraham to Avraham, Kum mischalech be'eretz la'araka v'lerachba. Kilochatnena, get up and traverse the land, its breadth and depth and length, for I will give it to you. This is the verse in Bereshis, Perek Gimel Pasuk Zion, Genesis chapter 13, verse 17. So I promised in the land of Israel, and Bikesh Makom looked for a Sarah, and he wants to go bury his wife, and he couldn't find a place to bury his wife. He had to go buy property for 400 gold coins from this guy Ephraim to bury his wife. So here I promise him the whole land, and then when he has to bury his wife, he can't find a plot of land. He has to go pay for it at a high cost and high price. He didn't question my judgment. He could have said to me, God, you promised me this land. Why am I paying for it? But he didn't do that. Likewise, I told Yitzchak, says God to Moshe Rabbeinu, I told your ancestor Yitzchak, Gur be'eretz hazeh, dwell in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. This is a verse from Bereshis, Perek Chavav, Pasuk Gimel, Genesis chapter 26, verse 3. And then, says the Gemara, Bikshu avodav mayim lishtois, Yitzchak's servants in the land that I promised him, he's there, and they're looking for something to drink, and they couldn't find any water, till they started fighting. The Torah describes dramatically how Yitzchak's servants dug wells, and then they were covered up, and then they had a whole dispute. Shinemar, as the verse reads, in Bereshis Chavav Chav, in Genesis 26:20, the shepherds of Gerar fought with the shepherds of Yitzchak until they finally settled. Loimer saying, the water belongs to us, no, it belongs to them. And yet, notwithstanding all of this, says God to Moshe Rabbeinu, Yitzchak didn't question my judgment. He could have questioned me. He could have come to me and said, God, you promised me the land, and here I am struggling to get water in the land that you promised me. Likewise, Amarti Yaakov, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I told Yaakov, a level land which you lie upon. To you I shall give it. This is the verse in Bereshis Chav Chesed Gimel, Genesis 26:13. And then Bikesh Makom L'Toya Ahaloi, Yaakov is searching for a place to pitch his tent. Well, he couldn't find it. He had to pay 100 guilds or whatever the coin is, Kshita, to find a place to live. And again, he didn't question my judgment. He could have questioned and said, why am I paying for land that you promised me, God? So God demonstrates to Moshe Rabbeinu that all three of the forefathers were promised the land of Israel, and each of them had to struggle to keep and live in the land of Israel. Avraham with burying his wife, Yitzchak with getting water, and Yaakov with finding a place to live. And yet, none of them questioned my judgment. And they didn't ask me, what's your name? Who are you? Let me see some loftier levels. Va'ata, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, the first time I meet you at the burning bush, before you even consider listening to me, you start asking me, what's your name? And now, after Moshe Rabbeinu went to Parai, and then Parai made it worse for the Jews, you're telling me, you're saying that I didn't save the people? Quoting the verse in Shmois Vav Zion, Exodus 6, verse 7. Atatira, God continues and says, now you shall see. Shmois Vav Aleph, Exodus 6:1. Now you shall see that which I will do to Pharaoh. You will see how I'm going to lead the Jewish people out. Stop questioning me. But the Gemara comments, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, now you're going to see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh. In my battle against Pharaoh, you shall see what I'm going to do. But you shall not see the battle of 31 kings, referring to the entering land of Israel. There you won't make it. In conversation. Tomorrow we're going to look at another interaction between God and Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Gemara is going to have some interesting comments about that as well. Excuse me. The Rebbe has a talk in which he comments on this discussion, this exchange between God and Moshe Rabbeinu. Specifically, actually, the Rebbe is talking there about the way Rashi describes the conversation, which is somewhat different than the way the Gemara describes the conversation, but the gist of it's the same, in that God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, your forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, did not question my judgment, and here you are questioning my judgment. And the Rebbe asked a simple question: why did Moshe Rabbeinu question God's judgment? Why? What was it about our Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that did not question God's judgment? And what is it about Moshe Rabbeinu that he did question God's judgment? And at the end, in some way, God gives in to Moshe Rabbeinu, because God does reveal the loftier level that Moshe Rabbeinu is asking for. And God says, now you will see. Don't worry, you will see. And that explains as follows, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, this is the gist of it. Our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they symbolize emotional attachment to God. Abraham in the emotion of love, Yitzchak in the emotion of fear, Yaakov in empathy and bonding, Rachmanis and beauty. So each of them had their own way of emotionally attaching themselves to God. The common theme between all of them is this emotional attachment, in that this is what you want, this is the way it is. They don't question anything, because it's not a logical, analytical relationship with God, it's an emotional one. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu, he is symbolized by Chachma, by wisdom. He received the Torah, the great teacher. His relationship with God is intellectual. And therefore, from the intellectual perspective that Moshe Rabbeinu comes, he questions, what's going on here? And therefore, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's true, Moshe, from your perspective, you're right to question, because you have the intellectual, analytical relationship. But I don't want your relationship to end there. I want you to have the virtue of the intellectual, analytical relationship with God, with me, while simultaneously also incorporating the virtue of your forefathers that have an emotional attachment from which they don't ask questions. In other words, even as you analyze God's ways and you think about what they mean and you try to rationalize them, at the end of the day, one must bear in mind that we are talking about God, which utterly transcends everything, and therefore is an emotional attachment and faith that this is what God does, and we do not question what he does, even as we try to understand it. What a powerful lesson and idea. Looking forward to tomorrow, God willing, where we continue the other interaction between God and Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Gemara's comments about that. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.